For the next 30 minutes you are going to learn exactly how predictable, how controllable, and how irrational the human mind really is. These are 15 real experiments, conducted on real people, in universities, in prisons, in classrooms, in laboratories around the world. And by the end of this video, you will never trust your own mind the same way again. Let's begin with the one that started it all. Experiment 1, the Milgram Experiment. The year is 1961. Yale University. Psychologist Stanley Milgram is troubled by a question that has haunted the world since the Nuremberg trials. How did ordinary German citizens participate in the atrocities of the Holocaust? Were they uniquely evil, or was something else happening, something that could happen to anyone, anywhere, given the right conditions? Milgram designs an experiment to find out. Volunteers are told they are participating in a study on learning and memory. They are assigned the role of teacher. Another participant, actually an actor, is assigned the role of learner and placed in a separate room. The teacher's job: ask the learner questions. Every wrong answer results in an electric shock administered by the teacher themselves, increasing in voltage with each mistake. The shocks are fake. The learner is acting, but the teacher believes it is completely real. As the voltage increases, the actor begins to express pain, then distress, then screaming, then, at the highest voltage levels, complete silence, suggesting unconsciousness or worse. At several points, the teacher hesitates, turns to the experimenter, a stern man in a lab coat, and asks if they should continue. The experimenter's response is always the same for phrases, delivered calmly: "Please continue." The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. Before running the study, Milgram asked psychiatrists to predict the results. The consensus: fewer than 1% of participants would administer the maximum shock. Most people, the experts believed, would refuse once the learner began to suffer. The actual result: 65% of participants delivered the maximum voltage, a level explicitly labeled as dangerous, potentially lethal. 65% of ordinary people, teachers, nurses, laborers, professionals, continued administering what they believed were life-threatening shocks to a screaming stranger, simply because a man in a lab coat told them to continue. The disturbing truth Milgram revealed: obedience to authority can override personal conscience. In the majority of human beings, not the minority, it is not a flaw found in a few bad people. It is a feature of how most human brains are wired to respond to perceived legitimate authority. Experiment 2, the Stanford Prison Experiment. 1971. Stanford University. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo wants to understand something different but related. Not obedience to an external authority, but what happens when ordinary people are given roles and power structures with no authority figure directing their specific actions at all. 24 male college students, screened for psychological stability, no history of violence or mental illness, are randomly assigned roles. Half become guards, half become prisoners. The basement of the psychology building is converted into a simulated prison. The experiment is scheduled to run for 2 weeks. It is shut down after 6 days. Within 24 hours, guards began enforcing arbitrary rules. By day 2, prisoners staged a rebellion. Guards responded by stripping them, using fire extinguishers, and placing rebellion leaders in solitary confinement. By day 3, guards were conducting humiliating exercises, forcing prisoners to do menial tasks, denying bathroom privileges, calling them only by assigned numbers rather than names. One prisoner, designated 8612, experienced what researchers described as an acute psychological breakdown, screaming and crying uncontrollably within 36 hours. Zimbardo himself, serving as the prison's superintendent, became so absorbed in his role that he failed to recognize the ethical crisis unfolding until his colleague and future wife, psychologist Christina Maslach, visited the basement and was horrified by what she witnessed. She insisted he end the study. The disturbing truth: situational power structures can transform ordinary, psychologically healthy individuals into cruel authority figures or broken victims within days, not because they are inherently good or bad people, but because the role itself reshapes behavior with frightening speed. It is worth noting that in recent years, the Stanford Prison Experiment has faced significant academic criticism. Some former participants have alleged that Zimbardo actively coached guards toward cruelty, raising questions about how much of the result reflected natural human behavior versus experimenter influence. We will return to this controversy later in the video, but even critics acknowledge something deeply troubling about power and role assignment was revealed, even if the precise mechanism remains debated. Experiment 3: The Asch Conformity Experiments. 1950, one psychologist, Solomon Asch, wants to know something simpler and in some ways more unsettling than obedience to authority. Will people abandon the evidence of their own eyes simply to match the opinion of a group of strangers? The setup is deceptively simple. A participant sits in a room with several other people, all of whom are actually actors working with that experimenter, though the real participant doesn't know this. The group is shown a line, then asked which of three comparison lines matches it in length. The correct answer is obvious, unambiguous, easy to determine by sight alone. The actors, one by one, confidently give the wrong answer. Then it's the real participant's turn. Across multiple trials, Asch found that approximately 75% of participants conformed to the incorrect group answer at least once, despite the answer being clearly, visibly wrong. In follow-up interviews, participants gave two different explanations. Some said they doubted their own perception. They genuinely began to believe the group must be seeing something they weren't. Others admitted they knew the correct answer but didn't want to stand out or be seen as different from the group. Either explanation reveals something unsettling. The pressure to conform was strong enough to override either independent perception or independent judgment in the majority of ordinary adults over a matter as simple and verifiable as the length of a line. The disturbing truth: your own direct sensory experience of reality is negotiable under social pressure, and most people will negotiate it away rather than stand alone. Experiment for the Bystander Effect Studies. March 1964. New York City. A young woman named Kitty Genovese is murdered outside her apartment building. Newspaper reports at the time claimed, with later evidence suggesting these reports were significantly exaggerated, that downed scenes of neighbors heard or witnessed the attack and did nothing. While the specific journalistic account of the Genovese case has since been substantially disputed and partially debunked, the case inspired psychologists John Darley and Biblottone to design experiments testing a genuinely real phenomenon, the bystander effect. In one key study, participants were placed in a room alone, or with one other person, or with a larger group, and told they were participating in a discussion via intercom. During the discussion, one participant, actually a recording, began to simulate a seizure, calling for help with increasing distress. The result was consistent and striking. The likelihood that any individual participant would seek help decreased as the number of other people present increased. When participants believed they were the only person who could hear that emergency, 85% sought help quickly. When participants believed for other people could also hear it, only 31% sought help, and many took significantly longer to respond, if they responded at all. Darley and Lottone identified the mechanism: diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people are present, each individual assumes someone else will act, will call for help, will take responsibility. The result is that responsibility becomes diluted across the group until, paradoxically, a person in genuine danger is statistically safer with one witness present than with 10. The disturbing truth: the presence of other people does not increase your chances of being helped in an emergency, it decreases them. Because human psychology treats responsibility as something that can be silently outsourced to whoever else happens to be standing nearby. Experiment 9, the Stanford Marshmallow Test Replication, the replication crisis itself. We close with an experiment about experiments themselves. Beginning in the 2010s, psychology as a field underwent what is now called the replication crisis. Researchers attempted to systematically rerun hundreds of classic, famous psychological studies, many of the very studies covered in this video under rigorous, pre-registered, modern conditions. The results were, for the field of psychology, deeply humbling. The Open Science Collaboration, in a landmark 2015 study published in Science, attempted to replicate 100 psychology studies published in top journals. Only approximately 36% replicated successfully, with statistically significant results matching the original findings. Many famous effects were found to be considerably weaker than originally reported, or in some cases, not statistically reliable at all. This doesn't mean everything in this video is false. The Milgram Obedience findings have been replicated repeatedly, including in a notable 2009 partial replication by Jerry Berger. The Asch Conformity Effect has held up well across decades and cultures, but other findings, including aspects of the original marshmallow test and parts of the Stanford Prison Experiment's interpretation, have required significant revision as more rigorous methods were applied. The disturbing truth of this final entry is different from the others, and in some ways more important than all of them combined. Even the science of human psychology is subject to the same human biases. It studies researchers wanting exciting results, journals preferring dramatic findings over null results, and the simple human tendency to believe a compelling story more readily than a boring, complicated, statistically modest truth. The most disturbing finding in psychology may be this: understanding that the human mind is flawed does not exempt the scientists studying it or you watching this video from those exact same flaws. The philosophical turn. 15 experiments, 7 decades, thousands of participants who had no idea, at the time, that they were revealing something so fundamental about human nature. Taken together, these studies paint a portrait that is uncomfortable to sit with. We are creatures who will hurt strangers when an authority figure tells us to, who become cruel or broken, depending purely on the role we're randomly assigned, who abandon the evidence of our own eyes to match a group of strangers, who walk past emergencies when other witnesses are present, who absorb violence simply by watching it, who let lateness override our deepest moral training, who construct vivid false memories and believe them completely, who rewrite our own beliefs rather than admit we acted irrationally, who fail to recognize genius without the right packaging, who can be convinced a piece of rubber is part of our own body, and, perhaps most importantly, who study all of this imperfectly, with the same biases built into the very science meant to reveal it. None of this means humans are simply bad, broken, or beyond hope. It means something more precise, and arguably more useful. Human behavior is far more situational, and far less a matter of fixed personal character than almost anyone intuitively believes. The seminary student who stepped over a suffering stranger was not, in some deep permanent sense, a bad person. He was a person in a hurry. The guard who humiliated prisoners was not a monster. He was a person given a uniform and an unsupervised basement. The participant who delivered what they believed were lethal shocks was not uniquely cruel. He was a person who trusted authority more than his own conscience, in a culture that had spent his entire life teaching him to do exactly that. This is, in its own way, hopeful. If behavior is this situational, then changing situations, structures, and incentives can change behavior on a scale that trying to simply identify and punish bad people never could. 15 experiments, 15 disturbing truths. But the 16th truth, the one underneath all the others, is this: knowing about these patterns is the first real defense against them. The participant who has heard of the Milgram experiment is measurably more likely to refuse the authority figure's instruction. The bystander who has learned about diffusion of responsibility is measurably more likely to personally act in an emergency. Even in a crowd, awareness changes outcomes. I want to ask you something before you go. Out of these 15 experiments, which one disturbed you the most? Which one do you recognize most clearly in your own life or in the world around you right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video genuinely changed how you see yourself or the people around you, a like takes 1 second, and it tells me to keep making content like this. I'll see you in the next one. Experiment 5, The Marshmallow Test. 1972 Stanford University. Psychologist Walter Mischel designs what would become one of the most famous experiments in developmental psychology. Children, aged 4 to 6, are individually brought into a room and seated at a table. A single marshmallow is placed in front of them. The instructions are simple. The researcher must leave the room briefly. If the child can wait until the researcher returns without eating the marshmallow, they will receive a second marshmallow as a reward. If they eat it before the researcher returns, they get nothing more. The researcher leaves. A hidden camera records what happens next. Some children eat the marshmallow within seconds. Others develop elaborate strategies to resist covering their eyes, turning their chairs away, talking to themselves, physically restraining their own hands. The average child in the original study managed to wait approximately 6 minutes before giving in, but the truly disturbing part of this experiment did not emerge until decades later. Mischel and his colleagues tracked many of these children into adulthood. The results were striking. Children who waited longer for the second marshmallow tended to have significantly higher SAT scores, lower rates of obesity, lower rates of substance abuse, and better social and cognitive outcomes as adults, correlations that persisted even when controlling for family income and IQ. A 4-year-old's ability to delay gratification for a marshmallow appeared to predict outcomes 30 years into their future. It's important to note that more recent, larger replication studies have found these effects are real but considerably smaller than originally reported, and are substantially influenced by family, socioeconomic background. A child's home environment significantly shapes whether delaying gratification even makes rational sense for them. We will discuss why that nuance matters later in this video. The disturbing truth, even accounting for replication corrections, a behavioral tendency observable in early childhood, the capacity to tolerate present discomfort for future reward correlates with major life outcomes.